What happens when Cold War-era fighter jets dare to challenge a warship built for 21st century battles? That's not just a hypothetical. It actually happened in the Caribbean, where two Venezuelan F-16s streaked across the bow of a U.S. destroyer bristling with missiles. To the cameras, it looked like defiance. To the sailors on deck, it was dramatic. But inside the ship's combat center, the mood was different. Calm, controlled, almost amused. Because this wasn't a showdown of equals, it was a glimpse of just how wide the gap has grown between Venezuela's aging air force and America's floating fortresses. And the real question isn't whether those jets could have sunk the destroyer. It's whether they ever stood a chance of surviving the encounter at all. It started with a single strike. A U.S. aircraft targeted a Venezuelan-linked speedboat in the southern Caribbean, claiming it was packed with cartel operatives. 11 men were gone in seconds. Washington celebrated it as a victory in the war on narco-terror. Caracas saw it as something else entirely, a blatant violation of sovereignty. President Nicolas Maduro vowed that Venezuela would not be pushed around. His words weren't just for Washington, they were for his people, a promise that their nation would stand tall in the face of American power. And almost immediately, the region braced for what came next. The U.S. answered with force projection. More than 4,000 troops surged into the Caribbean, backed by a naval task force of destroyers and supply ships. It was a clear message. Any challenge at sea would be crushed before it even began. But Caracas needed to respond, not with a war it couldn't win, but with a gesture, something bold enough to grab headlines and stir national pride. The answer came in the form of two F-16s, relics of the 1980s, still capable of screaming low across the waves. They cut across the bow of the USS Jason Dunham, an Arleigh Burke-class destroyer designed for modern naval warfare. To anyone watching from the shore, the spectacle looked daring, even menacing. Venezuelan media framed it as defiance in the face of overwhelming odds. But inside the Pentagon, the flyby was labeled something else entirely. Highly provocative. For the crew aboard the destroyer, it was more curiosity than danger. Because for all the noise, Venezuela had just exposed its most valuable jets, flying right into the sensor range of a warship that thrives on gathering intelligence. In that moment, one truth became impossible to ignore. This wasn't an even contest. One side was flexing for the cameras, the other was collecting data, staying calm, and holding every single advantage. And that sets up the bigger question. What exactly makes an Arleigh Burke destroyer so untouchable, and why would any pilot think they could rattle it? On paper, the USS Jason Dunham is a destroyer. In reality, it's a fortress at sea, engineered to dominate battles across air, land, and water, all at the same time. Start with the sheer size. Over 500 feet from bow to stern, displacing close to 10,000 tons, an Arleigh Burke isn't some fragile target slicing through waves. It's built to take punishment and keep fighting. Its steel hull is reinforced with Kevlar. The compartments inside are sealed and layered, so even if one section floods or burns, the ship survives. That's not an accident. It's a design philosophy. Never give up the fight. But survivability is just the foundation. What makes the Burke terrifying is what it carries on top of that. Enough missiles and firepower to fight off entire squadrons of aircraft, hunt submarines hiding in the depths, and strike land targets hundreds of miles inland, all at the same time. The centerpiece of it all is the Aegis combat system. Think of it as the ship's brains, tying together radars, weapons, and communication networks into one seamless system. At the heart of that brain is the SPY-1 phased array radar. Imagine a set of eyes so powerful it can scan 360 degrees, track more than 100 threats at once, and never blink. And in the newest variants, that radar evolves into SPY-6, more sensitive, more accurate, capable of spotting stealthier, smaller objects from even further away. For a pilot flying toward a destroyer, this creates a nightmare scenario. Long before you even catch a glimpse of the ship's gray silhouette, the Burke has already spotted you, analyzed your flight path, and locked you into its digital crosshairs. In modern warfare, the first rule is simple. Whoever sees first, wins. Against a Burke, you don't get to see first. And that's just detection. Beneath the deck are nearly 100 vertical launch cells. Think of them as silos for a custom-tailored arsenal. Long-range interceptors like the SM-2 and SM-6 to swat jets out of the sky. Medium-range ESSMs for maneuvering threats. Tomahawks to strike deep inland. And ASROC rockets designed to erase submarines hiding below. It's an arsenal that turns one ship into a floating weapons platform, ready to respond instantly to any kind of threat. Even if something were to slip through that layered defense, the last line is brutal. The CIWS, nicknamed Sea Whiz, is a Gatling gun that spits 75 rounds per second. It doesn't just fire bullets, it builds a wall of tungsten in the sky, shredding anything that comes too close. Many destroyers also add CRAM launchers, stacking another layer of short-range protection just in case. And the ship doesn't fight alone. Embarked MH-60R Seahawks extend its reach, patrolling the seas for submarines, spotting surface threats, and even carrying Hellfire missiles to strike targets themselves. Ship and air wing together form a self-contained combat bubble, an ecosystem of detection, defense, and offense that moves wherever it needs to. So when Venezuelan F-16s buzzed the USS Jason Dunham, they weren't rattling some exposed hunk of steel. They were brushing up against one of the most lethal packages of firepower and technology afloat. The question wasn't whether the destroyer could protect itself. The question was whether Venezuela's jets ever had a chance to matter at all. If the Arleigh Burke is a fortress, then the Aegis combat system is the mine that makes it unstoppable. Think of Aegis as more than radar or weapons. It's a digital nervous system that connects everything on the ship into one seamless network. The radars, the missile launchers, the guns, even the helicopters overhead, they all feed into Aegis, and Aegis reacts in seconds. At the heart of this system is the SPY-1 phased array radar. To most people, radar means a sweeping green line on a screen. SPY-1 is nothing like that. Instead of spinning in circles, it uses thousands of tiny radar beams fired simultaneously. The result? A constant 360-degree scan that never blinks, never rests, and never loses track. It can follow over 100 targets at once, from jets screaming high above the clouds to sea-skimming missiles trying to sneak under the horizon. And as impressive as that sounds, it gets even more advanced. The newest Flight 3 destroyers upgrade to the SPY-6 radar, an evolution so powerful it can detect smaller, stealthier threats at longer ranges. It doesn't just see you, it profiles you, identifying what kind of aircraft or missile. To the pilot, it feels like being hunted by an invisible predator. No warning, no chance to sneak close, no way to hide. This is the first reason Venezuela's jets never stood a chance: detection. Because in modern warfare, it's not about who fires first, it's about who never goes unseen. And against Aegis, going unseen simply isn't an option. Spotting a threat is only the beginning. What makes an Arleigh Burke destroyer so lethal is how it handles whatever it sees, through layers of defense stacked like concentric walls around the ship. The first wall is reach. If a jet dares to approach, the destroyer launches SM-2 or SM-6 missiles, long-range interceptors that can streak dozens of miles through the sky to destroy a target before it ever comes close. These aren't just fast, they're built to swat down supersonic aircraft and even ballistic missiles. For a pilot, that means the fight could be over before they even know it began. But if, by some miracle, an attacker slips closer, the second wall comes alive. That's where the evolved Sea Sparrow missiles, ESSMs, take over. Smaller, quicker, and designed for short to medium ranges, they're built to catch maneuvering jets and missiles that thought they had made it past the first line. If even that fails, the third wall is brutal. The Phalanx close-in weapon system, better known as CWIS, is a 20mm Gatling gun that spits 75 rounds every single second. To the naked eye, it looks like a stream of white fire. To whatever it's aiming at, it's the end. Add in CRAM launchers, essentially small missile batteries, and the final protective circle becomes almost impossible to breach. And here's the reality: every layer buys time. Every layer multiplies the risk for the attacker. An F-16 would have to dodge long-range interceptors, weave through a curtain of medium-range missiles, then somehow survive a wall of tungsten fire at point-blank range. That's not combat, that's suicide. And the destroyer doesn't rely on weapons alone. Its Seahawk helicopters patrol miles out, hunting submarines, spotting surface threats, and carrying Hellfire missiles to strike on their own. Together, ship and air wing form a mobile combat bubble, a sphere of protection that follows the destroyer wherever it sails. This is why Venezuelan jets buzzing a Burke never really posed a threat. On the surface, it looked like defiance, but tactically, they were never closer than targets in a firing drill. On paper, Venezuela's frontline fighter is the F-16 Fighting Falcon, but calling it frontline today feels more like nostalgia than reality. Back in 1982, Caracas made history as the first Latin American country to buy the F-16, acquiring 24 jets under a U.S. program called Peace Delta. At the time, it was a massive leap forward: supersonic speed, cutting-edge radar for its era, and agility that could dance circles around older fighters in the region. For a while, Venezuela's Air Force was one of the most capable in South America. Fast forward 4 decades, and that fleet is barely hanging on. Years of U.S. sanctions cut off access to critical spare parts. Without them, Keeping the jets flying turned into a nightmare of improvisation. Mechanics have had to cannibalize grounded aircraft just to keep a handful in the air. Analysts estimate that maybe 3 or 4 are truly airworthy today, and even those rely on patchwork fixes that raise constant questions about reliability. And then there's the technology gap. These are early block F-16A and F-16B models, versions that froze in time sometime in the late Cold War. They lack the upgrades that turned later F-16s into lethal 21st century fighters. No stealth shaping, outdated avionics, limited data link capability. Their radar sets are antiques compared to what a modern warship carries. Even their famous speed, over Mach 2 at full throttle, doesn't buy them safety. Velocity means little when your opponent can see you from over the horizon and fire missiles designed to erase supersonic threats. To the radar of a destroyer, these jets are bright targets without anywhere to hide. Yet despite the shortcomings, Venezuela keeps the F-16s flying. Why? Because they're more than machines. They're symbols. Symbols of sovereignty, symbols of resistance, symbols of an air force that still wants to show its teeth. When they roar low over the Caribbean, they send a message for the cameras, even if militarily that message rings hollow. But symbols don't stop missiles. And in a real fight, these jets wouldn't just be outgunned, they'd be outclassed before they even fired a shot. By the time those Venezuelan F-16s cut across the bow of the USS Jason Dunham, the outcome of any real fight was already written. On one side stood a relic of the 1980s, on the other, a fortress built to thrive in the 21st century. The imbalance boils down to 3 things: detection, layered defense, and survivability. First, detection. The destroyer's Aegis system and SPI radar network can track targets long before they're even visible to the human eye. Satellites, drones, and nearby ships feed even more data into the picture. That means a Venezuelan pilot could take off thinking he was making a daring run, but the destroyer had already logged his altitude, speed, and bearing before he was halfway across the sky. In modern warfare, going unseen is survival, and against Aegis, going unseen is impossible. Second, layered defense. The Burke doesn't rely on one weapon. It builds a cage of overlapping systems. Long-range missiles to kill threats at distance, medium-range interceptors to mop up survivors, and last-ditch guns spitting 75 rounds per second to shred anything that dares to get too close. Each wall of defense forces attackers to gamble with slimmer odds. For an F-16, the only real question is how far from the ship you'd be when you were erased from the fight. Third, survivability. A jet is a single fragile airframe, one missile, one burst of fire, and it's gone forever. A destroyer, by contrast, is compartmentalized and armored, with damage control systems designed to keep it fighting even after being hit. Where a fighter's entire fate hangs on one strike, the ship is built to take punishment and strike back harder. And then there's the tactical truth. A destroyer never fights alone. The Jason Dunham is tied into a battle group, backed by cruisers, supply ships, patrol aircraft, and even stealth fighters repositioned nearby. Venezuela's pilots weren't just staring down one warship, they were facing an entire network of American power. So yes, the flyby looked dramatic on camera, but militarily, it wasn't a contest. One side flexed for the headlines, the other held every real advantage. In the end, the only thing Venezuela's F-16s risked wasn't victory, it was escalation. One wrong move, one missile fired, and a symbolic stunt could have spiraled into a shooting war they couldn't hope to survive. If Venezuela's F-16s never stood a real chance against the destroyer, then why fly so close? The answer lies less in military logic and more in political theater. For President Nicolas Maduro's government, every encounter with the US is an opportunity to showcase defiance. Venezuela's economy has been battered by sanctions, its military weakened by years of shortages, and its global standing diminished. But one thing the government can still project is bravado. When a Venezuelan jet streaks low over an American warship, it creates a powerful image. David circling Goliath, a smaller nation standing up to a superpower. State media wasted no time amplifying the footage. Clips of the flyby ran on repeat, packaged with fiery rhetoric about sovereignty and resistance. The message to the Venezuelan public was clear: we are not afraid. Whether or not the jets had the power to back up that claim didn't matter. In propaganda, perception outweighs reality. And perception was the real battleground. By flying close, Venezuela could frame the US destroyer as an intruder, a foreign giant testing its waters. By broadcasting their response, they shifted the story away from vulnerability and toward defiance. It's a strategy authoritarian regimes have used for decades, turning weakness into strength through spectacle. But the US wasn't playing the same game. For the Navy, this wasn't a test of nerves. It was routine. American warships are trained to stay calm under pressure, to hold fire unless directly threatened. By not reacting, the Jason Dunham denied Venezuela the escalation it might have wanted. Silence, in this case, was the louder message. So while Venezuelan jets buzzed the deck, the real clash wasn't happening in the skies. It was happening on screens, in news broadcasts, social media clips, and government speeches. One side flexed for the cameras, the other side quietly reminded the world that power doesn't need to shout. At the end of the day, Venezuela's flyby didn't rattle the US Navy. It only highlighted the gap between symbols and real power. Two agents